I've just had a slot on LBC on Darren Adams' show. It's the first time I've got into LBC for a few months now. And he was discussing the revelations about Russia's hacking or the allegations of Russian hacking and interfering in the 2019 British general election. Um, there were callers sort of it came into a bit of a thing of what's a bigger threat, China or Russia. I made the point that they're both serious threats. We need to take both very seriously. It didn't last very long. I seemed to get cut off. I don't think that was LBC. I think it was some technical issue. Um, but I did make the point that I think we need to take a very assertive stance, and I think it is time to consider expelling Liu Xiaoping, the Chinese ambassador. Certainly escalate things, but I honestly think we are at that point. And it's the point that the arrogant regime in Beijing has imposed on us. Um, but rather than covering a whole range of issues, goodness knows there is a lot to say. Um, I mean, the arrogant, dismissive attitude that Liu Xiaoming had in his interview with Andrew Marr the other day, in which Marr showed him these very disturbing pictures of Uyghur men being shackled and herded on the trains. And Liu Xiaoming's response was typical arrogance and dismissal, claiming it was a routine prison transfer and he didn't know where the images came from. Um, but there is another development, and that is with our decision not to go ahead with Huawei. Beijing has now threatened consequences. Um, that's interesting. If you go into a shop, let me make this analogy. You go into a shop and you contemplate buying something, right? And then you say, "Well, I'm sorry, I've changed your mind. I've just reconsidered." Imagine if the shopkeeper turned around and said, "How dare you? You're going to face consequences for this." So that's how this thug regime works. Do what we say or else. That's how Beijing operates right now. I think that we're dealing with a powerful adversary, but I don't think they're so powerful that nothing can be done. But this thing about reprisals, that may take the form of preventing Chinese students from coming to the UK. And it's that aspect I want to talk a little bit about because it's sort of, I think it's more palpable, and this is the point I was trying to make on LBC before it got cut off, than the Russian issue because there isn't that many Russian students. It isn't as obvious an aspect of our situation with China. There isn't, it's not like Russian students are kind of being riled up to wave the Russian flag and demand respect for the motherland in the same way. Um, there is a lot of Chinese students in the UK even now, and they do contribute a huge amount financially to tertiary education. It's estimated, for example, about 1.7 billion was taken in fees from Chinese students. That is a significant amount. Um, so my concern is universities are being overly reliant. Um, but this is featured in both the Times and in the Eye. The Eye is talking about the reprisal aspect, and the Times is talking about how Chinese students feel stigmatized. So I want to address both points about the stigmatization. Um, if, as a routine thing, Chinese students are being labeled Chinazis or just being treated badly, as in a hostile way, just because they are Chinese, that's wrong. You can't assume that they are their government. However, I'm not overly sympathetic to the claims of victimhood, and this is why. Last year, there was many reports highlighted of how mainland Chinese students were actively harassing and bullying their Hong Kong peers. And that's something that there is evidence of going back at least to 2008, at the time of the Beijing Olympics, when nationalistic Chinese students were hounding their peers, including other Chinese nationals, for not being patriotic enough. They were doing this whilst they were studying in the United States, whilst they were studying in Britain and France. So that's why I am not overly sympathetic to claims that Chinese students are being victimized. Um, my response to them would be, of course, you shouldn't be treated in a hostile way just because of your nationality. However, if you are going to argue in defense of the Communist Party, if you are going to promote the Communist Party narrative, and if you are going to be overtly nationalistic, then do not complain about people not appreciating that. You know, do not portray yourself as a victim if you have come to another country and you're waving around your national flag and you're demanding respect, but you're not showing much. Okay? Because I'll tell you how Westerners see it. Westerners see that as hypocrisy because you're taking advantage of our freedom of expression that dissidents of the CCP do not have back in China. You know that. You know that you cannot make open protests in China. So Westerners, not just Westerners, critics of Beijing in general, see this as sheer hypocrisy on your part. I'm against all bullying. So, for example, if an individual Chinese student was kind of picked on, that's wrong. But the evidence would indicate that that is just anecdotal, whereas there is actual evidence of the abuse the Hong Kongers have suffered. It's physical marks. Some of them have been physically attacked. So I really don't have a great deal of sympathy with this idea that Chinese students are being picked on. University administrators are absolutely jumping over themselves to get Chinese endorsement. Apparently now, China has surpassed, excuse me, Britain has surpassed Japan as China's biggest partner for overseas students because more Chinese students are now coming here even than the United States, or at least Britain's becoming their first option. Why that is in the current climate, I'm not really sure because our tuition fees are high. Maybe it's just the reputation of our universities. I don't know. Maybe they have a genuine interest in British culture. I'm not sure. Um, or it could be that our universities really are going in overdrive to attract them. And the figures, as quoted in the Eye, suggest that the University of Glasgow is the most reliant on Chinese students, with 31% of all tuition fees coming from Chinese students. That's 31%. That's not just of international students. That is all students ostensibly. 31%, followed by the University of Liverpool at 29%. University College London tops the list as the university taking the most income from Chinese students at 127 million, followed by the University of Manchester at 110 million. Um, so that's in real terms, whereas Glasgow and Liverpool are percentage terms. Regardless, the picture is clear. British universities in general are overly relying on China. Um, so I mentioned that's my take on Chinese students' position. I think if they're here, they've paid money, so they should be given everything that comes with that. They should be given all access to the course materials, accommodation, everything that they've paid for. Um, and you know, I hope they have a good experience being in another country. I hope they get the. Obviously, this is a difficult time now with the virus, but and it may be that they need to be compensated if they've paid a lot of money and their studies have been restricted. There's question of distance learning. That's something British students have also had to face. I would say, just on a general point, I do think students should be compensated if their studies have been impacted because they've paid a lot of money, and it's not fair if they've paid for something and they're not getting the whole thing. Um, the virus isn't the fault of universities, but they do take a lot of money. So that's one thing. But I really don't have much respect for this argument that if you're waving around your national flag and demanding respect, don't play the victim, okay? Because that's something no British or Canadian or French citizen could ever do in China. So just don't play the victim. You're not. Um, Universities have also been inconsistent. Whilst universities are now complaining about Chinese students feeling stigmatized, they were silent. They were pretty much silent when the Hong Kong students were being harassed. They gave generic sort of memos to tell students to respect each other, but there wasn't a single Chinese student expelled. Now that indicates to me, and it's speculative, but it indicates to me that they're worried about upsetting the Chinese embassy or maybe the Chinese Education Bureau. Um, I just see this as another front, frankly, and that's blunt language, but that's how I feel. Um, and I'm not some sort of outsider. I've worked with Chinese students. I know not all of them are communist spies, and it would be unfair to stigmatize them all as that. What I would say though is if they're just getting on with their studies, minding their own business, taking endorsing British culture, just trying to have a good experience, that's fine, and they have a right to do that. But if they are actively engaging in political discourse, technically it's a right, but they cannot complain about a hostile reception. What they need to understand is, I mean, one student quoted in the Times said, "Oh, we just want dialogue. We're being picked on because we don't share the Western worldview." No, you're not. That's dishonest. A lot of these students are not interested in dialogue. They want to shout people down. They want to demand respect for China. That's not dialogue. That's forcing your jingoism onto the host nation. Um, and I think we need to be very clear about this. I remember one sort of situation I saw was a bit of an exchange on the bus. I worked in my local university's EFL department, which was I was a social assistant, and I'm not employed by them now, so I don't feel any sort of, you know, contract to keep my mouth shut. I did see, um, I did see some tension between students from Taiwan and students from mainland China over the status of Taiwan. So sometimes, the politics came through. I have to be honest. I never saw anything overtly nationalistic. I'm pleased to say, but Sunderland's a relatively small university compared to others, so it might be a different story in Newcastle or Leeds. Um, I know it is. The University of Sheffield, in my view, is one of the worst for pandering to China. Um, I just think that there is an over reliance on what's the price of that. What is the price of it? So if China responds to the Huawei thing by stopping all university students from coming here, firstly, how will that impact those students who are already here? I mean, if China pulls them out, it would be unfair on them because they've paid their tuition. Is the Chinese government going to compensate them? Because that would actually hurt them because they've paid the money, and if they're being pulled out early, then they haven't specified what this reprisal will be. If they stop students coming in the future, that's unfortunate. I don't really want that situation. I don't want a situation where all Chinese students just don't come. However, it wouldn't be the end of the world because universities seem to assume that China is the only option. I mean, why not attract Japanese students? Why not attract American students? Why not attract Indonesian students? There's a whole range of countries we can attract. And yes, China is a major economy, but why not attract students from other emerging economies? They may not be as big as China, but collectively, surely that would add up. Brazilians, Indonesians, Vietnamese. There's a lot of other students that we can attract at our universities without having to rely on China. So I think it's a bit of a phony argument to say, oh well, we just have to, we better not offend them. We better just turn a blind eye to the jingoism. We better turn a blind eye to the bullying of Hong Kong students. We better just give the Confucius Institute anything they want, um, at the price of just basically not allowing, or rather turning a blind eye to the jingoism coming from their side. What these students need to understand is, yes, they've paid a lot of money, but they are ultimately guests. And waving your national flag around in someone else's country, I mean, hell, I'm British. You might say, who am I to speak? We once colonized the world. Yeah, the British Empire was arrogant. That's also history. And I think what we're seeing today is kind of a Chinese hegemony. Um, a lot of what I would say to these students, you may not be employed by the Communist Party, and I'm aware that the vast majority of you are not communist spies. too young, you're too. I get that. However, you cannot complain about being perceived as stooges of the CCP if you will not condemn the CCP, if you will always defend them. So if you're a Chinese student studying in the UK and you're always defending Beijing, then don't complain about you being perceived that way. Because people see a lot of hypocrisies. They see you using Facebook, they see you taking advantage of our values of freedom of expression and using it against us. So, things are bad right now. That's a fault of your government, the arrogant behavior of your government. If you want to defend that government, then you cannot exactly expect um, Britons to be overly friendly, frankly. Um, it would be like Britain's in China right now. I imagine are in quite a difficult situation. I mean, we saw what happened to the two Canadians who are being basically held as political hostages. They haven't had a trial, they haven't had any access to a lawyer, no evidence has been presented of their case. That's what's happening to Westerners in China right now. So, when you compare the two sides, which is more tolerant, the answer is obvious, very obvious. That's why any sense of Chinese victimhood arguing, I don't take with a great deal of credence. I'm not totally dismissing it. I'm not saying there won't be situations where some individual Chinese students have experienced a bit of unfair stigmatizing, which is not right. And early in the pandemic, there were racist attacks on East Asian students in general, well, East Asian nationals in general. That was wrong. It was fuckish. It was wrong. Um, but things are tense right now. There's no escaping that. And you just need to be aware of that and be a little bit humble. I'm not saying that you can't have your opinion, and none of this is about, oh well, the Chinese students just have to agree and they have to criticize the government to prove that they're not stooges. No, they don't have to do that. But what I'm saying is if they actively defend the government, okay, it's one thing not criticizing it, but actively defending it is another matter. Personally, I think okay, they have a right to their opinion, but if they're going to be vocally defending CCP, and they can say, "Oh, we're not defending the Chinese government, defending China," they know full well that the CCP has an iron grip on China. So, in the geopolitical context, it is the same thing. I'm not saying it's the same thing generally, but in political discourse, of course, it's the same thing. Um, Criticizing China in that sense is meaning the Chinese government. So if you're defending China, you're defending the Chinese government by definition. It's not like they're saying, "Oh, we don't agree with the government, but please don't think that all China is bad" or something like that. They're not saying that. They're saying, "Oh, what China's doing in Xinjiang is justified, and Hong Kong belongs to China." They're being overtly political. They cannot say that it's got nothing to do with politics because it's very much to do with politics. So I just think it's really frustrating that our universities are being absolute lapdogs to Beijing. It's so flipping obvious. And I would say they need to consider, attracting students from other countries. This overt reliance on Beijing is a big mistake.